Again, I'm Jim Copeland, the Director of the Center for Legal Policy. I would, I would like to thank everyone for coming to our program and staying through lunch. Obviously, getting to hear from John Stossel is a great inducement to get you to stay through lunch. It's my pleasure to introduce John. We've had him speak here before, but it's been a while, and he's been a long-time voice on behalf of sanity in our legal system. He doesn't really need a lot of introduction. Those of you who watch TV know who John is. He's the co-anchor of 2020, an ABC News host for many years. He's won 19 Emmy Awards, and he's exceptional at being able to package for the common TV viewer complex legal questions and let people grasp it. To do a program on junk science or the judges of Madison County and actually make people want to watch it. And John gets ratings because, believe me, with his political views, if he didn't get ratings, he wouldn't be on the air. It's an exceptional talent that he's displayed. He's very active in the intellectual community here in New York. He's a graduate of Princeton, very thoughtful. He may or may not comment some on his own intellectual evolution from a consumer affairs reporter to a reporter who's really an advocate of free markets and believes that by and large free markets work, and by and large the government tends to create a lot of problems that those advocating government solutions often are unaware of in advance. He's also a published author who's sold a lot of books talking about legal reform, among other issues. Give Me a Break was his first book, was a New York Times bestseller. His second book was Myths, Lies, and Downright Stupidity. And John has also given of himself to really try to educate America's youth. A lot of us are worried about the messages our young people are getting in the classroom. And so John has created his own programs that he has gotten funding for and put his own money into, really to get short videos that really distill down complex topics, again, on market principles and how the world works to our young people and get those into classrooms. So it's my pleasure to introduce and to welcome you today ABC News anchor, 2020 anchor, the John Stossel specials. Give Me a Break. We all know him. Let's welcome John Stossel.
Thank you, Jim. Since you mentioned my classroom project, I'll just say a few words about that, and that it's just so frustrating to do these pieces for ABC that explain free markets, and then they're gone. And ABC spent $500,000 on them, and teachers often said, oh, I wish I'd taped that, or I did tape it, and we had great discussion about it. So we now have this charity. Christy Kendall, are you here? Where are you? She's now helping run it, so if you want to give her a card, if you want to help out, please do. So Marie, I congratulate you on your loser pays work. It's just nothing like having, some of you weren't here, a conference of lawyers who will find all these brilliant ideas why it won't work. And it can't work, while also saying, but maybe it would work. Ted Frank, I thought very correctly, saying, what are we talking about? I mean, there's just no appetite for this in Congress. There is such resistance. I think the last time there was a real proposal of Henry Hyde in 1994, it went nowhere. And part of this is because the personal injury lawyers in the trial bar just fight better than anybody else. I mean, they even game the language to the point that they call loser pays the English rule, like it's this weird British thing, when it's the rest of the world rule, and we have the stupid American rule. But Ted's right, there just is very little at this moment, and it's also a good time to get ready to think what the alternatives could be. And, of course, the trial lawyers, were they here? Are any here? Would say, I mean, the personal injury lawyers would say, we don't want this because every case we bring, or almost every case, does so much good. And it's hard to argue against that. And in some ways, you would think at the Manhattan Institute, they wouldn't be arguing against that, because Manhattan Institute is a place where people understand the benefits of competition and free markets and the problems with big government and the tort law is an antidote to big government. Instead of clumsy one-size-fits-all rules, you have the private lawsuit, kind of like, as Wally Olson's pointed out, a supplement to Adam Smith's invisible hand. They're the invisible fist. So I don't need the state's armies to fight for justice. I can hire my own private soldier. In theory, intuitively, that should be a good thing. And I think it's also why it's hard to fight for reform, because instinctively people like the idea of having their day in court. They understand that there are assholes around, and it's good to be able to hire a lawyer to protect yourself from them. Unfortunately, sometimes the assholes are the people who are filing the suits, and that's what we're here to talk about. I came to this, I'm not a lawyer, I just play one at the Manhattan Institute. I started as a consumer reporter, and I would report on businesses cheating people. And I was frustrated in that I would do the story and nothing would happen. And I wanted government, this was part of my education, which moved me toward being a libertarian. Government should fix this. And the politicians would pass laws in response to my stories. And I was excited and flattered. But then I saw that they didn't make anything better. They made it worse. And so then I looked at the trial lawyers and thought, gee, these personal injury lawyers, they can do what I can do, but more, because they can use force and they can really punish these bad guys. And I would refer people to trial lawyers when they would call me to say they were getting ripped off by people. But then they would come back a year later and say, I just got ripped off again by my lawyer. And it's tough for consumer reporters to be critical of the trial bar, because if you want to do investigative reporting, they are our best friends. And there is an evil partnership between investigative reporters and the trial bar, but it's hard to resist because they do all the work for us. I mean, they bring us the stories, and they will bring us the best victim that they will have carefully searched to be most influential with a jury. And of course, that's the person who's best on TV, too. I don't even have to make a phone call. They just bring her to me. And then they've used the power of force we give only to government and lawyers in America, subpoena power in this case, and they've subpoenaed every piece of paper some company produced, and they dig something out and spin it as evil doing and hand it to me. I put this on TV, and I get to look like I'm the big investigative reporter hero going after Ford or GM. Look at the evil things they did. So it's tough to be critical. It's instinctive for us reporters to take their side. But amidst this, we have a process that's making us not safer, but less safe and less free and less prosperous. Now, when people talk about reform like this, often the trial bar say, "Are you kidding me? Who but we will compensate the victims of these bad companies and these bad doctors? And who but we will deter these bad actors from doing these terrible things?" And when they say that, the critics, certainly the Republicans, tend to just fall away because they don't know what to say. But I would argue that both claims are deceitful. First of all, who but we will deter the bad actors? Well, excuse me, we have lots of prosecutors in America. If you break the law, you have district attorneys, state's attorneys, attorneys general, people who can put you in jail for breaking the law. That's enough. And even better, far better, we have the free market. Because now even more so with the internet, word gets out. If you hurt your customers, you don't thrive. The good companies thrive, the bad ones atrophy because word gets out. That's enough protection, punishment for criminal wrongdoing, and the market for everything else. We don't really need these tort lawyers, or even if loser pays, cut out some suits. Good, goodbye. We don't need all those suits. And who but we will compensate? Well, let me go on beyond that. I once asked Peter Angelos about this. He is got rich enough off these sleazy asbestos suits to buy the Baltimore Orioles and was very proud of his work. And the asbestos litigation As Jim had said, the Manhattan Institute has reported on this. It is just criminal what they have done, that they have mowed down hundreds of companies. The September 11th cost insurance companies $43 billion, I believe. Asbestos litigation so far is $200 billion. Just enormous damage. And I said to him, how come you get to make millions while all these other people suffer? And his clients got pennies. And he said, well, that's the system. If some people lost their jobs because of what we do, we can't be held responsible. Look at all the good we do. Look at what the lawyers found out about tobacco and the Dalcon Shield. And this is another of their arguments, that we will protect you from these evil people. But the truth is, the lawyers didn't tell us about tobacco. The lawyers didn't discover the problem with the IUD, the Dalcon Shield. The lawyers come in like parasites, like vultures, after the problem is already discovered, after the scientists have found it out. And then they feed off the carcass. Now, who but we will compensate the victims? Well, this too is deceitful. There are many ways to compensate victims. None is perfect, but they're all better than the tort system. I mean, we have private charity, that's the best, but also Medicaid, Social Security, disability payments, workers' comp. But what kind of compensation system is it where it takes people 10 years to get their money? I mean, that's just nuts. And what kind of system is it where, in many cases, the wrong people get the money? A Harvard study of medical malpractice cases in this state found that most of the people who collected were not victims of malpractice. And most people who were victims of malpractice didn't collect anything. It's a horribly blunt instrument. And then what kind of compensation system is it where most of the money goes to the middlemen? Now, Marie, in her report, was very conservative. She put the tort costs at about 40-some%, but some other people have found it to be as high as 70%. When you add in, you may say, well, why so high? What do you mean most of the money? The plaintiff's attorneys only take 30 or 40%. But if you add in the defense lawyer costs, some of you guys, and the court costs, up to 70% of the money is going to the process. This is a disgusting way to compensate people. And from this, we get the tort tax. I think the Manhattan Institute's own Peter Huber really popularized that. And it's true, and cars cost about $500 more to pay for lawsuits. And the problem is that they attack the people we need the most, the ones who stand on the edge of life and death, like the medical device makers. So a heart pacemaker costs $2,000 more to pay for the lawsuits. It's a terrible disincentive. But even beyond the cost, what I've learned in my reporting is when you really look at it, the bigger cost is what Phil Howard talked about. All the things we lose because of the fear that good people have of doing good things. All the good things that don't get invented. For example, in an age of who knows what bioweapon might be coming next, or just ordinary things, Lyme disease, mad cow disease, bird flu. I want there to be a lot of companies making vaccines, researching different vaccines. Nothing has saved lives more than vaccines have. And we used to have 20 vaccine companies in America. But then the lawyers sued, saying the DPT vaccine could have been safer. I don't know what the truth is. I suspect junk science. But let's say they were right, and they saved a dozen lives. Is it worth it? I would say no. Because since then, many of those companies got out of the vaccine business. They said, we don't make that much off our vaccines that we can take this kind of liability risk. Let's stick to our pimple cream business or our shampoo business. So we have 5 vaccine makers rather than 20. Are we safer? No, of course not. But the lawyers are richer. Genentech stopped research into an AIDS vaccine. Monsanto came up with a smaller dialysis machine. Would really make people's lives better, but they won't introduce it. Any innovation in an area of medicine, in an area where people might die, just risks ruinous lawsuits. We don't even have free speech anymore. We don't have honest job references because of the fear. I mean, if you fire Fred because he's lazy or reckless, do you say to the next company that might ask, Yeah, I fired Fred because he was lazy and reckless. No, your human resources department says, don't say anything because Fred could sue. I mean, if you say something good and then he is lazy, then the company could sue you. If you say something bad, Fred may sue you. In either case, as Jim said, uniquely to our system, when you win, you lose under the American system. So why take the risk? Medicine. We talked about medicine earlier. Certainly that's an area where this has led to enormous harm, and it's not just the increased costs and the doctors who flee, though that clearly is terrible. If you are hurt by a doctor, you can get recovery, but if the doctor has left your state and you die in the hospital, you die driving 2 hours to get to the hospital, there's no one to sue. I'm puzzled here by why my colleagues haven't picked up on these harms, and I think John Edwards is a good example. And you laugh for all the right reasons, and yet the reason I think this guy is evil is not because of his socialist ideas or because of his cheating on his wife. I think he's evil because of what he is most proud of and what he wrote a book about. He made most of his money on these kinds of lawsuits, most of them personal injury suits, most of them medical cases, most of those cerebral palsy cases. He claimed that the baby got cerebral palsy because it was deprived of oxygen during birth. And it was a theory at the time, might have been true. And he was good at it, good with juries. He in one case, he channeled the baby. He said to the jury, I hear her now. She's shouting, let me out, let me out. And the doctor wouldn't do a C-section. And she has cerebral palsy. The jury awarded $4 million. So, as I said, it was a theory. Since then, there's the usual reaction. Doctors, many of them said, well, I'll do more C-sections. I better be careful. I'll cover my ass. Now, the rate of C-sections has gone from 6% to 29% of all births since Edwards' suits. Now, some of it is not because of just fear of Edwards. Some of it is because the operation is simpler now. It's been improved. Some women even schedule it for convenience. But it's a much nastier operation, the C-section, compared to natural childbirth. Longer hospital stay, much more expensive, bigger scar, and 4 times as likely to kill the woman. So this is not a good thing that C-sections have gone from 6% to almost 30% of all births. Well, has at least the rate of cerebral palsy dropped since then? No, not a bit. Turns out Edwards was probably wrong. Is he given the money back? No. Are reporters even asking about this? No, and I don't understand this why. It goes to Ted Frank's point about we haven't made the case to the public to get them outraged by what, in my 40-year career as a reporter, has been just about the most outrageous thing from asbestos to this kind of stuff that I've seen. Now, I would argue we need some of these lawsuits. We need the invisible fist to supplement the invisible hand to protect us from bad guys living next door, to protect us from tyranny. We need these lawsuits the way we need nuclear missiles. But we try not to use our missiles. And that's the difference. And that's why Marie's loser pay idea, I think, is a good one. And that it would throw out some good cases with the bad, but that's okay. It's like the instant replay rule in the National Football League. If you remember when it first was introduced, they thought, look, we got the technology now. There's a lot at stake in a professional football game. We're having these refs make these judgments. Let's make sure it's right. And they let them challenge any play that they thought there might be a doubt. And people hated it because it stopped the game. It slowed it down too much. So how'd they solve that? They came up with, in essence, loser pays. You can challenge, but if you're wrong, you lose a timeout. And there's a limit to how many times you can challenge. Why can't we apply the same idea to our legal system? Let me just close with one more story from my reporting. One time we were reporting in a suburb of San Francisco, and when people saw our camera, they hid, slammed doors, pulled the shades down. This was a place where a neighborhood where people lived in fear. They were afraid to let their children play outdoors in some cases. And it was all because of one of their neighbors, a woman, Patricia McComb. She's like an atomic bomb right in our neighborhood, one woman told us. And why? Well, of course, it was because she sued people a lot. She sued a supermarket saying her foot was run over by a cart, and Bank of America because her foot was hit by a door there. Sued all the time. Sued a neighbor because the kid played basketball outdoors, and McComb said the noise caused her emotional distress. So his parents fought the suit, but they ran up against what Jim Copeland talked about, the ugly truth that even if you're in the right, you lose under the system because it costs so much. They fought the suit. It cost them $35,000 in legal bills before they gave up. They just paid her $5,000 to go away. The American rule is really an invitation to extortion. And that's what we have. That's what we have with these asbestos suits. We pass the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it becomes an extortion device for a group of rogue lawyers to go into every business and sue because your toilet paper roll is too low or too high. And the businesses pay because it's cheaper than going to court. It's legal extortion, and there's no embarrassment about this. Bank of America fought this woman and won. But it had to pay its own lawyers $27,000. I mean, that's not winning. I was sued by a quack in Philadelphia who I said was a quack. And he disagreed, and we had the trial, and we won. Yay, we won. It cost ABC $500,000. How is that winning? I mean, in that case, they used Rule 11 and made him pay some of our legal fees, but he only had to pay $200,000 of the $500,000, so it's still losing, and it just discourages that kind of reporting. And we went to the courthouse to check out McComb. While we were taping, she watched us from an upstairs window. She wouldn't talk to me, and a few months later, she sued me for slander. When we went to the courthouse, we checked her out, and the clerks all knew her well. And their reaction, they demanded we not give their name. And basically, they wouldn't give us any information. And that's what Philip Howard talked about. It's one of the sad, unintended consequences of the lawsuit system, fearful silence. And that's what this system is creating. Fearful silence and innovation in medicine, science, even the free speech that makes America possible is suffering from this. So I thank you for at least thinking about this, and the Manhattan Institute for coming up with alternatives. I hope we get some, and thank you for hearing me out today. So we have time for some questions or criticism or argument. The Manhattan Institute always says, wait till the microphone gets to you, but just put a hand up and someone will come to you with a microphone, I think. Oh, here she is. Why don't you just pick the people with the mics, and whoever has a mic gets to ask.
Harry Stein, City Journal. How supportive has the network been in your efforts to do this kind of reporting? I mean, they paid the as you just mentioned. In-house, how do your colleagues react?
Badly. I mean, that's a longer story. They're more sympathetic to this kind of legal reporting than my general supporting of free markets. I won Emmy Awards bashing business. Now that I'm critical of government, I don't win any anymore. And the late Peter Jennings, when he would see me in the hall, would do one of these. And he tried to get me fired. So I don't have many friends there, but to ABC management credit, they say, we may not agree with you, but these ideas deserve to be heard. And so I have a place at the table. I would say these days, ratings are just as much of a threat as politics, and as long as I can keep the ratings at the right level, I will survive. Why don't you say who you are?
Oh, I'm Steve Hockman. I'm a recovering lawyer, now a mediator. And I must say that I think the loser pay rule would be great for mediation because it would really encourage people to settle cases because of the added risk, of course, of paying two legal fees instead of one. In fact, Voltaire once said he only faced financial ruin twice in his life. The first time is when he lost a lawsuit, and the second time is when he won the lawsuit. So I think the good news is it would definitely reduce the amount of litigation because the contingency lawyers, and I've mediated many class actions, and we know they make their money settling, not litigating, because and they have nothing to, as you point out, it's many times extortion. If you had the loser pay rule, I think what the result would be is the contingency bar would basically be much more selective. That's the good news. There'd be all these cases. They would only pick the ones that are almost certain to be winners, or at least 50% likely to win. And that would be a good thing. My question is, and I'm curious to hear from the insurance bar, sometimes they say, be careful of what you wish for, because it's by virtue, the good news is to society to be less lawsuits. Of course, the defense now would be facing double, possibly, legal fees on those cases, which the good news is that would encourage settlements, which works. My question to you on the med mal is, Australia has a no-fault system for birth-injured baby cases. In fact, we had a bill here in New York, but it never got past the Assembly, and we all know why. 90% goes to injured people, and only 10% goes to administration. And as you point out, at least 70% in our system goes to lawyers and defense and what have you, transaction costs. What do you think of a no-fault system for, let's say, in medical bad outcomes, where the difference between act of God and act of negligence basically is the same vis-a-vis the injured person?
I haven't studied it. I like only to talk about what I've researched. The no-fault system on car accident stuff paid for by gas tax, proposed by Andrew Tobias years ago, I believe, was a great idea, which went nowhere in America, though I believe it exists some places. For medical certainly some people would argue, well, then you're losing one deterrent of bad doctors, and doctors cover for each other. They never punish their colleague who's a bad doctor. But I should stop because I haven't researched that, so I won't have good answers.
Michael Myers, New York Civil Rights Coalition. What about the other side? I mean, you give the examples of all the good actors on the corporate side, but you don't give the examples of all the bad actors. I mean, for example, in the area of free speech, the abuse of the slap lawsuit, you're going after people who use their free speech to criticize a product, and the corporations slam you with a lawsuit. You remember the Oprah Winfrey. Of course, she has, in terms of the meat and cows, but she has resources to defend herself. But there are individuals who will get dragged into court by people who are resourceful, corporations and institutions and people. And they get sued, and they got to be able to defend themselves. At the same time, there are also bad corporations who do evil. They commit scams and schemes, and very often the government is either out-resourced or under-resourced or in the pockets of industry. And therefore, you need the private bar. So what about the bad actors?
Well, clearly there are lots of bad actors, and I would add to the list of government reasons why they don't do it to their being, they're not underfunded. Government is by no means underfunded in America, but they're incompetent and risk-averse, and they don't take on those kinds of cases. A slap suit is an evil thing, but under loser pays, you'd have more protection against a slap suit, because if GM sued me for what I'm about to say about them this Friday, were I not having ABC to defend me, I knew, and my attorney would know, that, hey, he's got a good case. I'll spend the money here because if we win, we'll get money and all our legal fees back from GM. So yes, there are bad corporate actors. I would go back to my first point to say that most of those get punished by the free market, because if you're known for to be a construction company that rips off the people you build for and then sues those who complain, and that was prevalent with SLAPP suits in many states, word gets out, especially with the internet now. Anybody just has to go look up the home builder website and you'll find who is likely to rip you off. It doesn't serve you well to hurt your customers.
Yes, since we have you in person, I'd like to pick your brain. Nobody wants to be the giraffe, the person who sticks his neck out to get it cut off. So I'm interested in, and I personally don't think the media steps up to the plate as much as they should, because they've got the power. So you're one in the mix of many. I would like to hear your opinion on how you would suggest the media to get more involved, or people to get more involved. It may be a Pollyanna question, but I do believe that if we stick our necks out as a total, as a unit, it might work. But if just you and me and the few of us in this room is not going to do it. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
The media doesn't want to get involved because my colleagues in the media don't believe these things. They don't understand them. They have no economics training and no interest in econ, and they don't see the problem. They see the problem of the big company hurting the little guy. That's all they see. Now, I try to get the word out with my classroom project to try to educate high school kids, and we are in half of America's public high schools, weirdly, despite my issues with the teachers union. So that's how I try to get it out. How I would suggest what you do is write a letter when you see that reporter getting it wrong. You'd be surprised how few people reporters hear from. And just being told, look, here's your logic, here's why it's wrong, influences people. And unless you speak up, and business doesn't speak up, this is why business gets rolled in the public debate, that the lawyers fight for a living. Every day, that's what they do. They use deceit and trickery and good verbal abilities to make their case. And practice makes perfect, or really good at least. Well, business is busy producing things, and they're not as good at it. So it's up to people like you who come to Manhattan Institute events to get educated, and please educate the reporters.
Seymour Cohen, I'm a medical oncologist. In order to get things done, you need legislation to change it. Several weeks ago, I get a letter from one of the asbestos companies trying to solicit physicians to testify for them. On their letterhead is Sheldon Silver. Now, this guy controls New York State practically, and he votes on these issues and kills them, and he's tremendously powerful. How do we allow in a state like New York someone who has such a conflict of interest to openly advertise for business and to openly discourage, threaten people that, you can't vote this way? I mean, how do we get around that barrier?
Well, I question your first sentence. You said to change things, you have to get a law passed. Well, I think what mostly changes life is ideas and explaining things to people. And the idea that Sheldon Silver can still be the leader despite being a trial lawyer with a questionable record means that the job is in educating people. It's not a very good answer, but I don't know why he's the leader. It bewilders me.
John Herb London, the Hudson Institute. John, I'm going to ask a very naive question. In the 19th century, lawyers who engaged in frivolous lawsuits faced the barratry, which meant they would lose their practices. Whatever happened to barratry, and does it have any application to our time?
Herb, I don't know, not something I've researched, but the idea of a board of wise lawyers deciding who loses their license sounds scary to me. I could see the American Bar Association saying, oh, you attended a Manhattan Institute conference? You're out.
Yes, I was concerned when they were talking about corporations and you said something against them, they wanted to sue you. they can run the cost up so high with depositions and discovery, et cetera. It could be, in the millions of dollars going against them. And it doesn't even have to be against a corporation. But how do you handle, keeping it reasonable so that somebody can avail themselves of the system or protect themselves?
I think loser pay would help keep it reasonable because the corporation suing knows that, boy, if we delay, let's ask for more in discovery and do all the stalling tactics that they used on me, that if they lose, all that bill is going to come back at them. Now, I suppose the individual lawyer might like that, but the general counsel presumably would say, like the 2 chess clocks somebody brought up today, that the clock is ticking and it might speed things up. And clearly the example from other countries where there's less litigation shows it's better there. So it's hard to draw transnational comparisons because there are other factors going.
Al Lurie, practicing lawyer. You asked for some education. You said you invited and educate the journalists. There's an area of law that's growing in this country. It has nothing to do with these crazy plaintiff or the nutty lawsuit. It has to do with the area of pensions and employee benefits, ERISA and other related areas, which has attracted a plaintiff's bar, some of them enriched by such things as prior history in tort. There's a St. Louis lawyer who made his money in torts law and is now bringing actions against all possible corporations in America, the so-called stock drop cases, which has to do with buying stock in the company, and the fee-sharing cases, and the cash balance plan. These cases are abounding all over the United States. Not much attention is being paid to it. It's as bad as the junk medicine. I'm inviting you to go into that area, and you'll find a gold mine of abuse by the lawyers, not by individuals, lawyers looking for the cases for shakedowns, or what you call extortion.
Well, let me just give a winding answer to that. Short answer is thanks, but no thanks. And I'm sure you're right. There's probably horrible abuse there. But let's be realistic in the court of public opinion, in that I'm intensely interested in this subject. And as soon as you mentioned ERISA, I went to sleep during your question. And medical malpractice, at least you have cases of women suffering from having C-sections, and that has barely attracted an audience from the press. I tried to explain these things, and if any of you have ideas, please invite your help, but it has to be really visual and dramatic. I mean, to try to explain the extortion-like aspect of these suits where lawyers go around and demand that small businesses widen doors. And I said it's kind of like having someone come at your car with a baseball bat. And we rented an old car. And I got a baseball bat and went to a parking lot, and it's like coming up saying, pay me or I'll smash your car. And I smashed the car to try to show that even defending yourself would cost you more than the guy would have won from the suit, and how even when you win, you lose. And I thought this was just brilliant and good television. It really made the point. And I got email from people saying, huh? I didn't follow that. I don't get it. A lawsuit isn't like that. And so this is my apology for being so rude to you about your question. I'm just saying we really have our work cut out for us to answer Ted Frank's admonition about there's little public appetite for this. But there ought to be.
Your former colleague, Mark Halperin, talked about the incredible media bias this year in the election, and the Democrats are threatening to reinstate the so-called fairness doctrine. Would you like to comment about either subject?
The fairness doctrine sounds so good, doesn't it? All these things, the social justice, like, no, I'm for social injustice. sustainable development. No, I'm for unsustainable development. The fairness doctrine was the law that said if you put on a controversial public opinion, you have to put on the other side. And who could be against that? But of course, there was one more of those unintended consequences. It made station owners fearful of putting on controversial opinions because some bureaucrat was going to decide if you had responded in the right way. And only when it was repealed did we get talk radio and the alternative opinion we have now. Sean Hannity and others spent a lot of time talking about the Democrats bringing this back, but I just read a National Review article, I think it was, maybe it was American Prospect, very different, which made the point that no Democrat is really proposing this, and it's not on the table. So I don't really think the fairness doctrine coming back is a threat. As far as press bias, yes, I would say Mark Halperin is correct. It's not that the press loves Democrats, they just hate Republicans. At least the newsrooms I've been in.
On that note, I really enjoy your program, and
Thank you.
I've been watching it since the very beginning, when you were just a consumer advocate, and you still are, and going strong. My question is relating to this particular topic that we are discussing today. Let me introduce myself. I'm Rafael Escano. I do represent the New York City Comptroller, Bill Thompson. However, I'm going to ask you a question on a personal basis. I'm also a community activist. I'm looking at the phrase that we are reading today on the front page of your package, which say greater justice, lower cost. Looking at the discussion we have had up to this point, can you quantify justice?
No. Too big a question for me. But I want to pick up on your earlier phrase about being a community activist. This was played with during the campaign, and I'm surprised the press, again, people don't get that there are only two ways to do things, force or voluntary. And community activist can mean that you get people together and clean up trash and have safety patrols and tutor the kids, and all that's wonderful. Or a community activist can mean you assemble people to form a political group that lobbies for government force to give you stuff. And that's totally different, and I would say wrong, but I wish people would make that distinction. It's a major dodge to defining justice. Justice is when I think things are right.
Hi, David Fisher. In terms of getting the public interested, I was wondering about a notion where big ticket items can be sold on a dual price basis. One in which it's the regular cost. The second is in which there's a discount to the purchase price if the buyer agrees with the manufacturer to a loser pays litigation in the case of product liability.
Sounds good to me. But I hear people proposing, like, you can come to see me for one price as a doctor and another price if you agree never to sue or always to go to mediation. And the left opposes even offering the customer that choice as something that should not be allowed.
Bill Reed from Foundation for Economic Education. And
a good group in Irvington, New York,
Thank you.
which helps with my education videos, or will soon, I hope.
Proud recipient of the Adam Smith Award, or John Stossel. And as to the question of justice, I would direct you to a great work by Dr. Thomas Sowell, The Quest for Cosmic Justice, in which he discusses the various, especially focusing on legal justice, or as opposed to cosmic justice, which seems to propel a lot of other people in these endeavors that usually end in disaster. And on a second point, as in terms of selling these ideas to the public, I think the one argument they might be receptive to might be the cost, as I was discussing with Marie earlier, the costs
the tax on everything that everybody buys, from toilet paper to pencils to cars to homes, everything that you buy, in addition to what is lost, as Bastiat said, what is unseen, those costs. If you could somehow come up with a number and express to the American people the costs of these litigations on their pocketbook, you might be able to make some headway.
Maybe, but and Tillingham, I think, as various accounting groups have come up with various costs, and they're like $200 billion, and that's too big for people to absorb. Some people say individual costs, you can break it down. But I go back to Phil Howard's point, that's not the real cost. The bigger cost is the fear, the teacher who's afraid to hug the child because she might get sued for sexual harassment. That's the far bigger harm to America. And just, you're mentioning Thomas Sowell and communicating. It just reminded me of one other thing, that there is so much media bias, and the artistic community is totally of the left. And in the Village Voice, of all places, not long ago, there was this article by playwright David Mamet, perhaps America's greatest living playwright. And in this, he stuns me by saying, I'm no longer a brain-dead liberal. I've been educated by America's greatest living philosopher, Thomas Sowell. And I thought, wow, this will open a debate, and there'll be all kinds of discussion in the elite media circles. Not a peep. Say again? Probably.
Takes a while to change. One more question. There is one.
I'd like to thank John.
Thank you.